is a massive blockbuster Jaylen Brown trade on the horizon? That's what we're going to talk about on today's edition of Celtics Today by Chat Sports, as new rumors are circling around Jaylen Brown's trade availability and a potential trade partner that we have referenced before on this show. Before we get into all the new information on a JB trade, make sure you are subscribed, though, because if he does get traded, we're probably going live. I'd say we are definitely going live here at Celtics Today. And we are in the midst of a June sub battle with the frauds over at Warriors Today, who are only 6 subs ahead of us right now in the month of June. So can I get at least 6 diehard Celtics fans to subscribe to the channel, absorb the free Celtics content that we give you every day all offseason, and help us beat Warriors Today in this June sub battle before the month ends? All right, let's talk about a Jaylen Brown trade. And we referenced this quote coming from Chris Mannix, who joined Kevin O'Connor at Yahoo Sports on his podcast and just talked about a lot of different offseason topics. And Mannix is particularly tapped in with the Boston Celtics. And he said this about Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown is interesting. If he's in play, that's someone I think San Antonio will look at and will go after. But that was over a week ago that we heard this information. However, as offseason rumors have matriculated over these past couple of days, more and more information is coming out about a Kevin Durant trade. Now, the Celtics are not going to be involved in acquiring Kevin Durant per se, even though there's reported interest between him at the trade deadline. Now, that never materialized because it would be incredibly difficult to make a Kevin Durant trade to Boston. But from the San Antonio side of things, according to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points, quote, all has gone quiet on the San Antonio front as far as a Kevin Durant trade talk goes. And what have we known for the past couple of weeks? That Durant, that's his preferred destination. He wants to go and play in San Antonio, and we've heard that from his camp. We've heard that from multiple sources throughout this, kind of saga, that he wants to be paired up with Victor Wembanyama, De'Aaron Fox, and company down there in San Antonio. So that's where he wants to go, but it doesn't seem like San Antonio is the most interested team at this point. Right now, it looks like the leaders in the clubhouse are the Miami Heat, the Houston Rockets, and even the Minnesota Timberwolves are in more contact with these Phoenix Suns about a KD trade than the San Antonio Spurs are. Shams said the Spurs have not been the most aggressive team. So we're hearing from multiple people now, multiple real tapped-in insiders, that the Spurs are not really being that aggressive in trying to trade for Kevin Durant. So what exactly are they doing? What's going on down in San Antonio? Because I think with the way and the level of player that Victor Wembanyama is at right now, and you go out and trade for De'Aaron Fox, I think that core, maybe you add in another piece, can contend in the Western Conference, can contend with the Oklahoma City Thunder, can make the NBA Finals next year potentially. I think that Wembanyama is already borderline top 10 in this league, and he could go way above that next year if he is healthy. You add another third star in there, and you're looking at one of the highest-powered teams in the entire NBA. So it makes sense that San Antonio could potentially want to look at a guy like Jaylen Brown, who could be a part of that core for a long term. So Brett Siegel further said this: other than a potential trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo in the future, because that's what he had said would be the Spurs' first priority. However, we know that Giannis is likely, very, very likely, not leaving Milwaukee this offseason. They're focused on getting pieces around him. He said in the future, the Spurs have also monitored Jaylen Brown's status with the Boston Celtics through the years. Now that the Celtics are primed to take a step back and are looking at cutting costs, the 28-year-old Finals MVP is suddenly worth talking about. As of right now, though, word surrounding Boston points in the direction of holding on to Brown and instead exploring trade avenues involving Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. And that's not new information, right? We've heard that the Celtics are not shopping Jaylen Brown, and they would be silly to do so. He's a former Finals MVP. Literally a year ago yesterday, he took home that award, and he's been one of the best 3-and-D wings in the entire league for basically most of his career at this point. But he makes a hefty price tag, and the Celtics are looking to cut costs this summer, and the easiest way to cut a big chunk of money off while still getting elite pieces back would be trading a guy like Jaylen Brown. Now, more from Brett Siegel here about this notion. To this point, the Celtics have not signaled that they would be seriously consider a trade involving Brown this offseason. Now, I get that. They're not going out there and calling teams up. Yeah, what would you give us for Jaylen Brown? We're kind of thinking about what his value might be around the league. Well, there's no reason for them to do that, but they absolutely should take calls. At this point, though, have they gotten an offer? That's the question, because would they seriously consider it? Yeah, I think that they would, but I don't think that there's been an offer presented to them yet. Maybe San Antonio is making that happen in these coming days. But if that's the case, if you were Brad Stevens, would you consider trading Jaylen Brown? That's my question to you guys on today's show. Yes or no? Is he an untouchable player for you guys with the Boston Celtics? Listen, he's provided so much He was so quintessential when it comes to what they did to make that championship run last year. And when he's been vaulted into a 1A role for Boston, he has taken it in stride. So I love JB, would love to have him around long term. But if they get a monster deal they can't refuse, I don't think that he should be considered untouchable. Yes or no, would you consider trading Jaylen Brown or not? Look, man, if they get an offer like this, it would be tough to turn down. There's no doubt about it. So I decided to go through a couple different trade ideas. This is the one that we brought up a couple weeks ago when we first, kind of introduced this idea of a blockbuster trade between San Antonio and Boston. The Spurs would get Jaylen Brown, and in return, Celtics would receive Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, and the number 2 overall pick in this coming draft, and be primed to take Dylan Harper, the point guard, out of Rutgers. Now, this deal specifically is kind of the one that Chris Mannix originally alluded to. He said that the Spurs, from his point of view, would be more willing to give up the number 2 overall pick than a player who just won the Rookie of the Year in Stephon Castle. However, a lot of people think that Dylan Harper's got way higher of a ceiling and is primed to be way better of a player long term than a Stephon Castle would be. So, me personally, I would think that the Spurs would be more hesitant to trade away that number 2 overall selection than to trade Castle. Now, this trade idea involving Castle would be, to me, what seems a little bit more realistic. And it would not include the number 2 overall pick. It would include some first-round draft capital. We just saw Desmond Bane go for 4 unprotected. So there would absolutely be some draft assets going back to Boston, but it would not be the number 2 overall pick. Maybe you see the 14th pick in this year's draft. Who knows? Maybe Boston sends away the 28th pick to move up as well. Look, I would accept both of these offers, and this offer specifically is one that's being floated around on Twitter from an unreliable source. It could be completely fake news. This guy says that he's tapped in with the Spurs, a guy who's tapped in with the Spurs front office who has that framework already ironed out. And he says that the deal is done. They're going to announce it after the NBA Finals. Look, I'm not saying that that's even remotely close to true, but it's definitely getting a lot of traction on Celtics Twitter, no doubt about it. But regardless, I'm accepting either one of those offers. Like, I think you get a blue chip, like young talent, regardless if it's Castle or the number 2 overall pick. You're getting a guy who you can believe in for the future. You're also getting a guy in Devin Vassell who could fill up the stat sheet, scoring the basketball. And, you maybe get a couple other marginal pieces as well to try to compete in the Eastern Conference next year, even though you're losing Jaylen Brown. I'll talk more about Jaylen Brown trade value in just a moment, but make sure you're hooked up with this awesome deal that we have for you guys. I know it's summer, but look, this is the cheap time to go out there and get your hoodies for when it gets cold. And the AC's pumping all around down here in downtown Dallas, Texas, so I'm wearing hoodies here and there. Get hooked up with this Celtics hoodie that you see on screen because it's 40% off with our friends over at Fanatics. This link right here, chatsports.com/BOS hoodie. Boss hoodie to get yours today. 40% off. Go get hooked up with this fresh Celtics hoodie for when it gets chillier later on this year. Look, the only way that Brad Stevens trades Jaylen Brown is if the offer is unrefusable. The offer has to be too good in order for JB to be on the trade block, and that's what I think those 2 Spurs trade ideas provide for Boston. They get an elite player in, either number 2 or Stephon Castle, and then you get another, starting level player in this league in Devin Vassell. And then who knows, if you get the Castle deal, you end up getting more draft capital down the line. It feels like a no-brainer for a team that is desperate to get their tax books under control. And then you also only create about $10 million with that deal anyway. So you make another deal, and you look like a whole different team heading into 25-26 and even different heading into 26-27 when Jason Tatum returns. However, I don't think that trading Jaylen Brown is completely out of the question because they were going to do it before. Like, this was going to happen. As a matter of fact, they were going to trade Jaylen Brown and Derek White for Kevin Durant a couple of years ago. So acting as if Jaylen Brown is completely untouchable is, I think, a little naive, to be honest. But to be fair, this did happen way before he was an All-NBA player or was a Finals MVP, Eastern Conference Finals MVP, all those honors. So it makes sense, I guess, that he wasn't exactly the player that he is today when they made that offer. But still, they were willing to trade a player who was viewed as a franchise cornerstone for years to come for Kevin Durant a few years ago. So if they don't count them out trading him right now. I just haven't seen any offers go out yet. But that's the thing. Like, Brown's value in a trade is difficult. Like, it's difficult to pinpoint. Like, would the Spurs want to do any of those deals? Probably not, to be quite honest with you, because of what you are getting in a Jaylen Brown. You're getting a $50 to $60 to $70 million player. So you're committing to him either being your best player or your highest paid player. I'm not so sure how many teams in the NBA want to do that, even though he is an elite basketball player. He takes up 34.4% of next year's salary cap for the Celtics. Like, that is a lot. That's like more than a third of the entire basketball team's payroll is going to one guy. And then you factor in Tatum, who's not even going to play. He makes like 36% of the salary cap next year. So a huge chunk, 70% of the salary cap is going to two guys. If you want to compete at all next year, you might have to get a little bit more depth. But hey, if you don't want to do that, Jaylen Brown has shown that in 40 games without Jason Tatum in his career, that he can be the man. Look, 27 points per game, 7 boards on as efficient of shooting numbers as he's had it in his entire career, 50% from the field, 35% from three. That is elite level basketball from Jaylen Brown. And if you're getting this, that's awesome. But I would not count out the C's looking at a potential Jaylen Brown trade if the offer is astronomical. Shams Charania, I remember, said this. Now, are some teams making big offers and calling about Jaylen Brown and Derek White? 100%. The Celtics prefer not to trade them, from my understanding. But listen, if they get a big offer, they have to look at everything. And that's the bottom line. It's going to be incredibly unlikely that the Boston Celtics trade Jaylen Brown this offseason. He makes a ton of money. It's difficult to find a trade partner, and it's difficult to find a team that wants to take on that big contract and have him be the first or second best player on the roster. However, there are teams that are going to be interested. There are teams that are going to make offers. Shams Charania reported that. And the C's should take calls. If Brad Stevens gets an offer from one of those teams that he just cannot refuse, then it makes total sense to go out there and trade Jaylen Brown. You avoid super high cap percentages down the line between your two starting players. Look, it's very, very difficult to have two supermax contracts on your books, and the Celtics are facing that reality right now. If they get a monster offer from, say, the Spurs for Jaylen Brown that includes a Stephon Castle or includes a number 2 overall pick that could become Dylan Harper, you go and make that deal 10 times out of 10. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel, because if that goes down, you know we're bringing you all the latest rumors. As the things continue to heat up, we're bringing you more content here at Celtics Today. So lock us in, youtube.com/CelticsTV. We'll see you guys on the next one. And as always, let's go C's.